Hey mamas, Sam McCormick here, founder of the Warrior Mamas movement. And today I wanted to talk about something that is very close to my heart. In fact, it is one of my biggest fears, and that is childhood disease. Specifically, is the food that we are eating and giving to our children making them get sick? Now, like I said, as a mama, this is one of my biggest fears. I have known so many families who have struggled with this when their kids are getting sick and potentially even passing away from these different diseases. And sadly, some of them are preventable. Not all of them are genetic. And this is terrifying because as a society, our government is not taking the responsibility of informing its citizens of this. And this is why it's my mission to spread this information to as many mamas as possible. So this way we can save not only ourselves from disease, but our families as well and our children. And the big thing is that it starts when you are pregnant. Now, there are many different factors that go into and contribute to disease in our society. One of them is environmental toxins. So, for example, genetically modified organisms, GMOs, they are genetically modified specifically so this way they can resist the spraying of pesticides. So this is why in our industrial agriculture system that we currently use in the US, our crops are covered with these pesticides. Now, if you haven't heard me talk about this previously, pesticides originated in World War II. These chemicals were used as chemical warfare, and they were also used in the gas chambers in the concentration camps. Now, after the war ended, the US companies brought these chemicals back and rebranded them as pesticides to use on our commercial crops. And these pesticides are so dangerous to your health. I don't know if you have been paying attention to the news, but there is a huge lawsuit with Roundup right now because it has caused cancer in so many individuals. And Roundup is one of these pesticides that was used in spraying our crops. So when you eat genetically modified foods, whether it's GMOs in the produce aisle, or if you're eating processed foods with GMOs in them, a lot of the cereals specifically, like Cheerios and Frosted Flakes, they are produced from GMOs, and our kids are eating these foods and they're covered with these pesticides. And this is one of the contributing factors to not only diseases in adults, but also childhood disease, is that they are consuming these GMOs that are covered with these toxins. Now, along with the industrial agriculture system spraying these toxins on our foods and then us ingesting the foods, it also gets into the groundwater and the soil. So if you live in an area next to industrial farming, that's also a huge concern for you because these toxins are getting into your environment as well. Another thing that goes into disease, actually real quick, another thing to mention with these GMOs and the pesticides and the chemicals is it starts when you're pregnant. So if you are consuming these foods when you are pregnant, they can pass through in utero to your baby, which can stunt their development, which is super bad. And then once your baby is born, if you are breastfeeding, they could pass through your breast milk as well to your child. So it can start as early as conception that these chemicals are starting to affect your children, which is why pediatric disease is so scary and why you really need to be cognizant of what you are consuming, especially as a mom, and what you're feeding your kids. So as your kids get older and they start eating your own food, you need to be very conscious of the ingredients and what is going into your kids' food. Again, the processed foods with the GMOs is one thing that is super scary, but another thing that you need to pay attention to is the chemical additives that go into your food. There was a huge thing, I think it's Red 40, that is an artificial dye that's used in a lot of food that is linked to cause cancer. So you need to be reading the ingredients list on all of the products that you are purchasing for yourself and your family, because if they are consuming these foods, it can lead to a number of pediatric diseases, including cancer, which is not something I ever want any mother to have to go through, or father, because it, again, one of my greatest fears, and it's so heartbreaking. So in order to prevent these, you really need to be careful on what you are eating and consuming and feeding to your family. And then, of course, childhood obesity is such a huge epidemic in our country. And this is because of, again, the food that we're feeding our children. These processed foods are calorically dense and nutrient poor. So they're eating all of these processed foods, and they're eating a ton because as kids, they're programmed to eat so many calories because they're growing and they need it. But biologically speaking, hundreds of years ago, we didn't have processed foods. Even 100 years ago, we did not have processed foods. Processed foods are a relatively new invention in the last 100 years that, again, are calorically dense and nutrient poor. So when our children are hungry, they are programmed to eat as much food as possible, but they are programmed to eat whole foods and plant-based foods, but instead in our society they are fed these processed foods, ice cream bars and Twinkies and bagel bites and frosted flakes and all of these other things, and so they're eating much more than calorically they need, and so they're packing on the pounds, but they're not getting the nutrients that they need because these foods are nutrient poor. And so there is this epidemic in our country with our kids are becoming obese, but they are so sick because they're not getting the nutrients that they need to grow and thrive. And so obesity is another huge thing that we can avoid with our children, and really be careful of what we're feeding them, not only at home, but pay attention to what your children are eating at school. If they buy school lunches, pay attention to what your schools are feeding them. I know so many schools that either hire out to places like Pizza Hut and all these fast food, or they serve them, pizza at lunch or microwave meals, and it's not okay. So really be an advocate for what your children are eating at school, and try to make changes, because that's how we make changes in our society. Is we start at the grassroots level and we say, hey, this isn't okay with me. This is making our children sick, and we need to do something about it. So I know that was a lot to throw at you. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. I love to hear from you. Other than that, I wish you the best of luck in trying to make changes in your schools and trying to make changes in your household, so this way you can avoid every parent's greatest fear, and that is our children getting sick. So I hope you ladies have a fabulous day, and I will